now, after completing a 1-year internship, now you all have come to a point where you got registration from the medical, permanent registration from the medical council, and you all are now practicing. Now, while you were doing the internship, uh, I mean, you were allowed to do practice medicine under supervision. The consultant was responsible for your acts. Now, the problem is now you all are independent doctors. Now you all are responsible for your actions. And sometimes you might get into trouble where the medical legal duties are concerned. So now, once you obtain the permanent registration in the medical council, you get certain privileges. For example, say, you can use the title doctor in front of your name, and also you can issue death and medical certificate. Actually, we don't issue death certificate, we issue the death declaration only. But still, so the medical service, as you are aware, you were not paid a salary during your internship because the government can't pay your salary because you don't have permanent registration. Now, as you all are having permanent registration, you can charge a fee for your service. That's why you are paid a salary. And also, you can start a private practice and earn money. And also, you can prescribe, handle, and keep dangerous drugs in your possession. So these are some of the privileges you get. In addition, the doctor will be bound by your professionals regarding a given subject. This knowledge is human beings. Sometimes we might use these privileges for the benefit of ourselves. Actually, this so legal professional has ethical and legal duties towards the society because it is the society that comes first. So you, whatever the decision you take should be benefited by the society as well as towards the patients. So patients are our clients. If you don't have patients, they don't need doctors. Therefore, if a patient comes to you, ask him for help, it is your duty to help him to utmost, right? Towards the colleagues, now medicine is not a single-handed job. If somebody thinks that you can practice medicine single-handedly, that's false. The health system or the Minister of Health has employed us, so they can't do the job alone. So therefore, they have given the responsibility to us. Therefore, we have to work together with the system, right? So these obligations are legal as well as ethical. Now, when it comes to ethical duties, now ethics are not laws. They are not written in the laws, but these are more duties. Good doctor. So if they do something wrong, they can't correct it because the patient might die. Therefore, everybody accepts ethics from us, a higher standard of ethics from us. Now, basic principles of medical ethics. Number one is the principle of maleficence. So you can't harm a patient. Any decision you take while treating a patient should be for the betterment of the patient. Now, you might do a surgery, you might do something else, but still you can't harm the patient. It should be for the benefit of the patient. Principle 2 is the beneficence. So your decision should be benefited by the patient, only by the patient, not by the bystander, not by the system, or not by anybody else. But there are differences. For example, say sometimes we when you treat a patient, you have to balance the risks as well as the benefits. Now, if the risks are more than the benefits, then sometimes you might not go for that treatment line. You might go for an alternative method to treat the patient, right? Then the autonomy. Now, general law says the body belongs to a particular, I mean, my body belongs to me and your body belongs to you. Nobody can invade somebody else's body without permission. If you invade, then that can amount to an assault and the person can be charged. But when it comes to medicine, I mean, it is for the betterment of the patient, but still we invade. Therefore, if the patient says no, we have to obey it or we have to respect it. But still, being a professional, sometimes we know he says no, but if you don't invade, he will get into trouble. Then you have to convince the patient for your treatment, and you have to tell the patient that this is the benefit and this is the complication. Then, so this is the point where the consent comes. I will discuss consent later. The principle of accuracy. All you can obtain the consent from the legal guardian. Suppose the child is in the school, no parent, no legal guardian. Yeah. For treatment purposes, you might get the consent from the school teacher, but for not for any other thing, only for treatment, emergency treatment procedures. Now, suppose it's a street child and there is no parent, no legal guardian, nobody is there, then you can inform the head of the institution saying that this child needs this treatment and there's nobody to get consent. It's an emergency. So I am proceeding. Then the director or the head of the institution has the legal authority to give you permission to treat the child for the benefit of the child. Unconscious patient, sometimes you have to do emergency procedures. Still you can do, because there is this legal concept called the necessity legitimates an otherwise wrongful act. So therefore, you can treat a patient if it is necessary to save the patient's life. In good faith, you can treat a patient without consent to save the patient's life, right? The law will consider your actions as legitimate, may consider your actions as legitimate, right? So sometimes parents will refuse treatment for a child. For example, say there are certain religious groups where they don't take anything outside to their bodies. Sometimes parents may say not to transfuse blood to a child. Then there is a system in the law. You can inform your head of the institution, and then you might get a temporary custody order from a magistrate. I mean, it's a long procedure. I am not going to explain the procedure here, but still there are provisions when there is refusal of consent, right? Unlike the past, patients are demanding, you will get into trouble. Think twice. Now, then the other necessity is the chaperone. Now, about 2 months back, I went and gave evidence in High Court where a doctor has examined a female without the chaperone. Now, the allegation is to say that she was trying to sexually harass the female. There is no eyewitness, but still our law goes by the statement given by the female because we can't exclude that. So it should be decided by a court. So it will be, there will be long court procedures. Therefore, it's better to have a chaperone when you examine a patient. Now this chaperone business is there, written there in the health minutes, as well as it's an ethical need as well as a legal need. I mean, now the giving consent by a patient does not mean that the doctor can do whatever he wants. Now, there are restrictions for us, ethical restrictions for us. So we have to think, right? Now, a male doctor, if a male doctor examines a female, you should have a female chaperone. If a male doctor examines a male, you might have a male or a female chaperone depending on the situation. If a female doctor examines a female patient, yeah, better to, if a male doctor examining a male, sometimes you might think that I am a male and he's a male and I can examine. No, there are allegations. Even recently, there was an allegation against a doctor by a child of 14 years old. I mean, you never can say what will happen. So therefore, have a chaperone by your side. A female doctor examining a male, you can have a male or a female chaperone. A male doctor, there's something wrong in this thing, but still, a male doctor examining a mother with a child, you have to have a female chaperone. If a female doctor examining a mother and a child, you may get a female chaperone. Given evidence in several occasions in court of law. Something that should be documented that indicates that you have not done that thing. In medicine, everything should be documented. You might have treated the patient, you might have done the best to the patient, but still, if you have not documented that in the bed ticket, the law presumes that you have not done it. Therefore, when you are treating the patient, you have at the same time you have to treat the BHT also. You have to write everything in the BHT. If you don't write everything in the BHT, the law might presume that you have not done that duty, right? So the documentation is very important to safeguard yourself. Now document everything in the BHT. BHT is the only legal document available. I mean, these cases come 5 years after the incident or say 3 years after, 2 years after. You can't remember your patient because we are coming across a lot of patients per day. Therefore, there should be a document. The document is the bed ticket. So this might take against or for the doctor, but still you have to document everything in the BHT. So there are cases where the courts have opinion from judicial medical officers regarding these sort of incidences to say whether it's correct or wrong. And also the other thing you have to think about is the Right for Information Act. This Right for Information Act, in that act, it says there's a separate section for more. The other thing is, in our system, we can't refuse patients. Because the contract is between the Director General of Health Services and the people of this country. Now he has told the population, look here, I have hospitals, you come, I will treat freely. But he can't do it alone, so he has employed us. So the direct contract is between the Director General and the people of this country. You are just an employee of the Director General, fulfill that contract. Therefore, you can't refuse a patient in government practice. Whoever comes to you, it is your duty to treat, and it's your duty to advise, and it's your duty to look after the patient. But in private sector, it's different because the contract is between you and the patient, and you might decide. But if you refuse a patient in private sector, you can refuse, yes, provided the patient has enough time to find the second doctor and he has no life-threatening condition, and he should accept your refusal. Now, if something happens between your refusal and going to the second doctor, you are totally responsible, right? So there are these cases called medico-legal cases. Now, these medico-legal cases, most of these medico-legal cases are handled by the judicial medical officers. Treatment is given by the ordinary medical officers, but the medico-legal aspect is handled by the judicial medical officers. Now, these are patients who are alive, and you have to do, you have certain medico-legal obligations regarding these patients. All injuries due to violence and accidents, self-inflicted injuries, sexual assaults, child abuse, criminal abortions, any suspicious injury, and you should inform this to the relevant police station. Now, there is an argument to say that doctors have no legal obligation to inform these cases. Yes, I agree. Because there is no law for us to inform these cases to police. But the general law says, if a citizen of this country or a person in this country thinks that there is a crime happening or a crime is going to be happen, he has all his legal obligations to inform the relevant authorities, right? So therefore, it is your duty to inform, and we are continuing this as a practice. So you can't get away from this practice. You should inform the relevant police station regarding the MLEF. Sometimes there is a question. This question is asked by most of the medical officers and nurses. If the patient says not to inform, can we not inform to the police? No, you can't. If you suspect that there is a part and parcel of a crime, or say these injuries are suspicious, and you have to inform the police. Sometimes you allow the patients to go against medical advice. In this category of patients, sometimes you allow them to go against medical advice. So what you call LAMA, LAMA. Don't allow them, because you can't decide on that. Now, you inform the police. If the police comes and tell you that they are not issuing a MLEF because there is no case in this, still, you can ask the police to write it in the BST. So, if the police says we are not issuing MLEF, then you don't have any legal obligation to keep the patient. Now, it is the Attorney General who decides whether to file a case or continue a case against a person in respect of a crime. It is not the police, it's not the doctor, or it's not the judicial medical officer. But still, if the police is not issuing a MLEF or medical legal examination form, we don't have any legal obligation to keep that patient longer. But still, you have to ask the police to write it in the BST saying that we are not issuing a medical legal examination form. On the other hand, now if there's a patient with a medical legal examination form and you want to transfer that patient to a better institution, you can transfer. Don't wait till the JMO examines the patient, because in our law, a JMO or a doctor who is working at Matara can examine a patient who has been assaulted in Jaffna, because this is a single country and one law. So there is no obligation. So you can transfer the patient with the MLEF to the treatment center, next treatment center, because we are doing everything for the benefit of the patient. So you have all the legal rights to transfer that patient. But for your safety, you write in the BST, you transfer the MLEF number so and so issued by on this date was attached to the transfer form. And even in the transfer form, you can write the MLEF, this number and the date of issue is attached herewith. Then the JMO or judicial medical officer or the medical legal doctor in the next institution will examine this patient. Don't transfer the patient without the MLEF, because that will create problems, because the second police station will not issue MLEF to this patient and he will have to go here and there after the incident to get a report for legal purposes. So you can transfer a patient with MLEF. Right? Sexual assault cases and cases of child abuse. So these are considered as complicated cases. But legally, any government medical officer who has full registration in the medical council and a government medical officer can examine any medical legal case. according to the CPC or the Criminal Procedure Code. But if there is a complicated case, better to refer to a JMO or a medico-legally competent person. No consultant can refuse a referral like this, because even the College of Forensic Pathologists, we have agreed to examine these cases by consultants, because these are complicated cases and you have to go to courts and give evidence, and the cross-examination will be complicated, and therefore consultant JMs are examining these cases. So my advice is refer the case. And if you like and if you want, there is no legal bar for you to examine the case, but still better to be examined by a consultant or a person who is competent in judicial medicine, the registrar, senior registrar, whatever it is, right? All right. Inquests. Now, inquests are fact-finding inquiries done by magistrate or ISDs on dead bodies. Sometimes doctors might be called to give evidence. I mean, actually, this is not giving evidence. These are clarifications. Sometimes you might write the cause of death, but still the inquirer or the magistrate want to clarify certain things, they might call you. And when the patient is dead, if you think of requesting an inquest, then first thing you have to write is to the director of the or the head of the institution, asking for permission. MS, sir, please authorize an inquest for this case. Then write to the police for arranging an inquest. So you can write to the police post if there is a police post in your hospital, or if not the closest police, to arrange an inquest. They will do everything else, informing to the magistrate or the ISD and informing the relatives and getting down the relatives, and everything is done by them, not the judicial medical officer of your institution. Once the authority or the order is given for a post-mortem or examination, the judicial medical officer comes into the scene, right? Now, there are two types of inquests, category A and category B. Category A are, according to the Criminal Procedure Code, there are certain deaths occurring under certain circumstances requires an inquest. Right? There is this category B. By practicing the State Health Service, that is the Ministry of Health, certain deaths occurring under certain circumstances are referred for an inquest. Now, this category A consists of all unnatural deaths. So these are legal requirements. These are laid down in the law, in the Criminal Procedure Code. All unnatural deaths, homicides, suicides, accidents, attack by animals, caused by machinery. All suspicious death. If you think that you can't come to a conclusion regarding the manner of death, yes, you have to request for an inquest. Then death due to an act that could amount to criminal act. For example, say rash and negligent act, like say road traffic accidents or criminal abortions. Then sudden unexpected death where you don't have a cause of death. If you don't have a cause of death, you can't go for a pathological postmortem. You have to go for a judicial postmortem through an inquest. Deaths where medical cause of death is unknown. All deaths occurring in a mental hospital or leprosy hospital. We don't have leprosy hospital now, but the law says, right? Deaths while in police custody or prison custody. So now, suppose the person is in custody, but he was treated in the hospital, still it should go for a for an inquest. Now, pathological postmortems cannot be done to ascertain the cause of death. Before you request for a pathological postmortem, you should have the cause of death or the death declaration written in the book. Then, after writing the death declaration, you have to get the consent from the next of kin. And also the director of the administrative head of the institution should authorize the pathological postmortem. Pathological postmortems have nothing to do with judicial medical officers. They are done by the clinicians and the pathologists. What we do is only we provide the facility and the equipment and a laborer sometimes, right? So pathological postmortems are done to ascertain the extent of a disease or the response to treatment or complications due to treatment, not to ascertain the cause of death. You have to have the cause of death before requesting a pathological postmortem. Category B, so there are circulars of health ministry as well as the justice ministry, but these are not in the CPC, but recently they are going to change the law and they might add certain things to the criminal procedure code. Maternal deaths, deaths following surgery or invasive procedure and anesthesia, tetanus, rabies, following blood transfusion, following immunization, when drug reaction overdose is suspected as a possible cause, death of an unidentified person, then alleged medical negligence or medical malpractices. So most of these things are to avoid the allegations towards the Ministry of Health or the health system. But still, you have to go for an inquest. You can't release these bodies from your ward without an inquest, right? Then when you refer a case to a consultant JMO, for example, say you are working in a periphery and there is this postmortem, you feel like not doing the postmortem and you need to refer this postmortem to a specialized unit. Write a letter stating the reasons for referral. Why you refer this case to a specialized institution. They don't write that you can't or you are not competent to do the postmortem examination, because for that you might, if somebody complains, you might be charged for incompetence in the medical council as well as in the system. Therefore, write that in your opinion, you think that the case or the postmortem needs the opinion of a consultant JMO. Then nobody can refuse it. Just write it and send it for second opinion, right? So you might not do certain postmortem, but don't tell the system or the inquirers or others that you don't know how to do a postmortem, right? So you think this postmortem should be done by a specialist, or you think a specialized opinion is needed for this case, right? Now then comes the medical certificates. Now issuing false medical certificate is an offense, right? Now there are three types of medical certificates which we send. One is, which we give, one is Health 170 for major staff. This is given free of charge and it's not given to the patient. You post it to the relevant institution. Health 231 for minor staff, free of charge, but still you don't hand it over to the patient. You post it to the relevant institution. Then Health 307 or private medicals. So this is given after payment. You can't issue a private medical without payment. So you have to ask them to pay and get the receipt to you. Then you attach the receipt to the counterfoil and then you issue the private medical certificate. You can give it to the patient, but get a signature in the counterfoil that he received the medical certificate. Now, in general, leave is for maximum of 3 months, 1 month at a time for 2 months, and 2 periods of 2 weeks. This can be changed. I mean, always this can be changed. But still, this is the accepted method. Should not cover more than 5 days of past absence. And if beyond 3 months, recommended to medical boards, but always the consultants can decide and they can change this rule. But this is the general rule. When it comes to alcohol, now I have seen in BHTs, most of the OPD doctors as well as accident service doctors and doctors in wards write alcohol plus, alcohol 2 pluses or alcohol 3 pluses. This is no way an international classification of consumption of alcohol. Now, when it go to courts, they might ask for when a patient is charged for drunken driving or something like that, and where a JMO has not examined the patient, sometimes police might say he was admitted to this ward and to summon the BHT. When the BHT goes to courts, the judge can't interpret these pluses in the courts. It should be a accepted line of classification. So what he does is he sends a summon to the relevant doctor or the head of the institution or the consultant of the ward to clarify this. It's unnecessary trouble. So there are 2 or 3 types of classification. So it's smell of alcohol and no clinical features of intoxication detected. That you can write. Then the patient is under influence of alcohol. To decide a patient is under influence of alcohol, you have to do certain tests and you have to exclude certain natural diseases. So that can be done in, say, a short time, but still, if you can refer the guidelines issued by College of Forensic Pathologists, that it's in the web, I think. So these guidelines clearly gives you an idea regarding how to write smell of alcohol without any clinical features of intoxication, or if the patient is under influence of alcohol. So don't write pluses and pluses, because you will be called to clarify certain things in courts, right? But nowadays, all the consultant JMOs are given with the facility of rapid test, saliva test, to detect the blood levels of alcohol. But sometimes in near future, we will be having judicial medical officers to grade B base hospitals also. So there won't be a big problem, but still, if you write or if you fill the MLEF, just remember pluses are not accepted by the courts or even other people, right? Now, this also I think you have to remember. So there are things called serious professional misconducts. There are 6 A's a doctor cannot do, and there are about 12 F's. So I'm not going into details because this will be a separate lecture, but still, you can't do abortions. In our law also, there is no provision to perform abortions, but still, being a medical personnel, you know how to do an abortion without getting caught. But if you get caught, your registration can be permanently erased from the medical council. So abortion cannot be done. You can't, alcohol comes like this. Male doctors, you can drink and stay at home, or you can drink in a party, but you can drink and treat a patient. You can drink and come to work. Even E-Code says in Sri Lanka, it's zero tolerance. You can't have any amount of alcohol in your blood if you are a person who is working or a government servant, right? But you can't get addicted to alcohol. That will question your performance and your ability to treat a patient. So addiction and treating under influence of alcohol or after consumption of alcohol, you will lose your certificate, registration. Then adultery. As mentioned earlier, doctors get enormous privileges. So you can visit homes, you can treat the patient, you can ask the person to remove his clothes. No one else can ask. A doctor can ask a person to remove his clothes. So sometimes doctor might take these things for their advantage. So if you take your profession as an advantage for your sexual gratification, then that is called adultery. You can have a affair with a patient and later you can marry that person. That is all right. But still, for your sexual gratification, if you use your professional powers, that is called adultery, and you can lose your registration. Then addiction, as the doctors can use means prescribe, keep, and dangerous drugs in your possession. They can't get addicted. If you get addicted to the dangerous drug, then your registration can be questioned. Then you can't advertise saying that I am the best for this procedure, or I am best for this specialty or something like that. And also, you can't associate unqualified or unprofessional people in your professional work. You have to always have qualified people in your professional work. And also, so there are 12 F's, which I am not going into detail because the time is limited. So my take-home advice is don't get into trouble. Call the nearest JMO for opinion when necessary. You may call my office when you need help, right? All the JMOs I know will help you all not to get into trouble, right? So you can call one of our officers, or say even Colombo South Teaching Hospital JMO's office, one of my MOs or one of my registrars, senior registrars, or even myself might help you in certain not only medical legal issues, even other legal and ethical issues that you might come across during your practice. Thank you very much.